Most people don't live in reality. They live in their story about it. That story, your map, feels real, but it's not the territory. Here's what I mean. Someone doesn't reply to your message and instantly your brain fills the silence. They're ignoring me. A client asks a question and you label it, they don't trust me. Your teammate looks distracted and you decide they're not engaged. None of that is truth. It's interpretation. And interpretation isn't reality. It's a filtered version of it. The problem? Most people build their decisions, relationships, and even their identity around those filters. They react not to what is, but to what they think is. That's how good leaders lose great people. How entrepreneurs sabotage opportunities. How teams fall apart over stories that were never true. In NLP, we call this the gap between the map and the territory. The difference between your inner representation of the world and the world itself. When you forget that your map is not the territory, you start fighting ghosts, defending beliefs, assumptions, and judgments that only exist inside your own head. But when you remember it, when you realize that every word, label, and meaning is just a map, you regain power. You stop reacting, you start seeing. And that's when influence, clarity, and real connection begin. A few years ago, I had a team member who suddenly went quiet. She stopped speaking up in meetings, stopped volunteering ideas. I had convinced myself I knew why. She checked it. In my head, I replayed the last few weeks like a detective. Maybe she didn't feel appreciated. Maybe she was job hunting. Maybe she was mad at me. The more I thought about it, the more certain I became. My map was crystal clear. So I pulled her aside one afternoon to address the issue, and she looked confused. Then she said, I've been dealing with migraines lately. I'm trying to stay focused, but it's been hard to look at the screen for long. And just like that, my entire map shattered. It hit me how quickly we project our own stories onto other people. I wasn't reacting to her reality. I was reacting to my version of it, my assumptions, my insecurities, my need to feel in control. Now think about how often we all do that. A friend cancels plans and we assume they don't care. A client hesitates and we label them difficult. Someone disagrees with us and we decide they're closed-minded. But none of those reactions come from the territory. They come from the map we've drawn in our head. And the scary part, the more detailed our map becomes, the less we actually see of reality. It's only when you pause, when you check your assumptions against the territory, that you start leading and communicating from truth, not projection. Your brain doesn't record reality, it edits it. The first thing to understand is this: you never experience reality directly. You experience your representation of it. Every second, millions of bits of information flood your senses, sight, sound, sensations, words, data, energy, but your brain can only process a tiny fraction of it. So it does what every good editor does. It deletes, distorts, and it generalizes. This isn't a theory, it's neurology. The reticular activating system in your brainstem decides what deserves attention. The amygdala flags anything that feels emotionally charged, and the prefrontal cortex stitches fragments of perception into a story that feels coherent, even if half the facts are missing. That story becomes your map, and just like any map, it's simplified. It leaves things out, it exaggerates others. So you don't see things as they are, you see them as you are. That's what NLP calls your map. The mental model your brain builds to make sense of the world. It's influenced by your beliefs, memories, values, and past experiences. The territory is what's actually happening. The danger is when you mistake the map for the territory, when you believe your perception is the truth, that's when blind spots appear. You misread people, you react to assumptions instead of reality as a whole. You stop being curious. You start defending your opinions like they're facts. You misjudge intentions and make decisions on partial information. Leaders do this all the time, not because they're unwise, but because their nervous system is efficient. You see a delay and label it laziness. You interpret silence as disengagement. You hear feedback and feel attacked. Your brain fills in gaps faster than you can question them. And each time you do, your map becomes a little more distorted until you're managing your assumptions instead of your people. The goal isn't to erase your map, it's to update it constantly, to stay flexible, curious, and aware that your version of reality isn't the only one. When you remember your brain is editing, not recording, you stop taking everything personally. You stop defending your version of reality and start investigating it. Awareness is where change begins. So before you try to fix anything, notice your edits. When you feel triggered or certain, pause and ask, what might my brain be deleting, distorting, or generalizing right now? That single moment of awareness reopens the data your filters left out, and with it your ability to lead clearly. Words are not reality. Once you start noticing how your brain edits reality, the next layer is to explore how language keeps shaping it. Because the moment you put words to an experience, you've already changed it. Words aren't just labels. They literally program how your nervous system reacts, how your brain interprets events, and how you feel. When you say, this project is a nightmare, your body responds with stress, tension, and urgency. When you instead say, this project is a challenge, your system shifts towards focus, problem solving, and resilience. The event didn't change, the language did. The words you choose change the map your brain relies on. That's the essence of neurolinguistics. Your words don't merely report reality, they code it. And when your vocabulary narrows, so does your map. Leaders and entrepreneurs fall into this trap all the time. We describe people instead of behavior, and in doing so, we close off possibilities. Instead of thinking or saying they're lazy, focus on describing what you actually observed. They missed 2 deadlines. He's been quieter in meetings. You instantly separate the person from the behavior, keeping clarity intact while avoiding assumptions. You stay curious, you keep empathy alive. Next, replace judgment-heavy words with data-focused language. Words like always, never, impossible, or should exaggerate your map, triggering unnecessary emotional reactions. Swap them for precise observations, like this step has been delayed 3 times, which grounds your interpretation in fact rather than story. The same goes for the words you use with yourself. Phrases like, I'm overwhelmed, or I can't handle this, signal threat to your brain. They tighten your focus and shrink options. Reframe them as, I have a lot to organize, or I'm prioritizing what matters first. And your system reorganizes towards control and clarity. Small linguistic shifts create massive state changes. Finally, make it a habit to reality check before reacting. Ask yourself, what did I actually see or hear? What else could this mean? Doing so rewires your brain to seek evidence, not assumptions, and ensures you respond to the territory, not just the map you drew. These steps may seem small, but over time, they transform how you lead, communicate, and influence. Teams move from blame to clarity, clients feel understood, and you stop reacting to stories and start responding to facts. If you want to take this even further, check out my video on calibrating on behavior. It's the perfect next step to see exactly how observing and responding to actions, not labels, changes results. You'll find the link in the description. Because once you master your language, you don't just change how you talk, you change what your mind believes is true. Awareness expands options. Once you realize your map isn't the territory and your words are shaping that map, the real work begins. Updating it, because awareness without adjustment changes nothing. Most people walk through life reacting to the same patterns, replaying old maps drawn years ago. They assume their perception is just how it is, not realizing it's actually just how it's been. The map froze somewhere in the past, but the territory keeps moving. Updating your map means staying curious, checking your interpretations against how true that is right now. It starts with calibration, observing what people do, not what you assume they mean. If someone's tone feels off, don't jump to conclusions. Watch their behavior, ask clarifying questions, and stay open to being wrong. You'll be amazed how many misunderstandings dissolve when you test your assumptions instead of defending them. Next, expand your map by seeking multiple perspectives. Talk to people who see things differently in your team, your relationships, your market. Each perspective adds new terrain you couldn't see before. Remember, you don't have to agree with another person's model of the world. To learn from it, respecting their map simply gives you a more complete view of the territory. You can dive deeper into that in my earlier video on respect for the other person's model of the world. The link's in the description. Finally, treat feedback as navigation, not judgment. Every response you get from people, results, or outcomes is data about how accurate your map is right now. Leaders who listen instead of react can course correct before small distortions become major detours. When you live this way, curiosity replaces defensiveness. Flexibility replaces control. Influence becomes effortless because you're no longer fighting to be right. You're learning to see more clearly. And that's the real mastery of this presupposition. When you stop living inside your map and start exploring the territory, you stop surviving the world and start leading it. The power of seeing the real territory. What if you never update your map? You keep reacting to ghosts, assuming intentions, defending stories, and solving problems that don't exist. You keep losing trust, not because people are difficult, but because you're arguing with your own projections. You lead from emotion instead of clarity, from judgment instead of curiosity. And the world around you, your team, your clients, your relationships, would start reflecting that distortion back to you. That's the silent cost of living inside your map. You don't just misunderstand others, you miss opportunities, connections, and ideas that could change everything. But what if you did the opposite? What if you started seeing people and situations as they are, not as your filters paint them? I think back to that team member I once misjudged, the one I thought had checked out. After that conversation, something shifted. I started catching myself before jumping to conclusions. I began to ask more and assume less. And I didn't just change that one relationship. It changed how I led. Meetings became lighter. Conversations became clearer. Even conflict started to feel productive because I was no longer defending my story. I was exploring reality. That's what happens when you update your map. You stop reacting to assumptions and start responding to truth. You start leading people, not your projections of them. And the more you do it, the more the world opens up because you're finally seeing it as it is, not as your filters once forced it to be. So ask yourself this: what maps have you been living inside about others, about yourself, about what's possible? And what would your leadership, your relationships, your entire life look like if you finally stepped into the real territory? When you stop reacting to your map and start exploring the real territory, assumptions turn into awareness. Conflict turns into understanding. And communication becomes connection. True clarity isn't about being right. It's about seeing more. When you do that, you don't just lead better, you live better. Ready to keep expanding your map? Click on the next video and let's keep growing together.